Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, let's dive into the good martini. It's a follow-up on one of yesterday's good martinis. We talked about how the first legislative priority for the House and Senate was the Laken Riley Act, which means if you're in this country illegally and you get arrested for things like even shoplifting, but larceny, burglary, obviously anything violent, you are to be taken into DHS custody, Homeland Security, and presumably put on the fast track to deportation. And so that would seem relatively non-controversial. Get rid of the criminals who are here illegally. And thankfully, the vote was pretty lopsided in the House of Representatives yesterday. The House passed the bill just after we stopped recording yesterday. And the good news is, in addition to passing it easily, there are more Democrats on board this time. Last time, the House passed the Laken Riley Act with 37 Democrats voting in support of it. This time, 48 Democrats in the House of Representatives joined all Republicans in voting for the legislation. Now the question is whether they can get 7 Democrats to go along with presumably all Republicans in the Senate to get to that magic 60 votes to cut off debate and move to the final vote. It looks like we're getting close. There's 5 Democrats who we think are going to support this. John Fetterman, who we'll hear from in just a second, has certainly been a co-sponsor of this. Ruben Gallego, who backed it in the House last year, has said publicly he'll back it again. We think that same scenario is going to be true for Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. Add Gary Peters of Michigan to that list. And it also looks like John Ossoff of Georgia. So just 2 away, which means optimism is probably on the rise in the Senate. Here is John Fetterman talking about this legislation on Special Report with Brett Baer last night and explaining how this should be a no-brainer.
And I'd like to remind everybody that we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of migrants here illegally that have convicted of crimes. And why, I don't know why, who wants to defend that, to allow them to remain in our nation after that? And now if you're here illegally and you're committing crimes and those things, I don't know why anybody thinks that it's controversial that they all need to go.
Do you think that this was one of, if not the biggest issue for this election?
Well, I think if we can't, there's 47 of us in the Senate, and if we can't pull up with 7 votes, if we can't get at least 7 out of 47, and if we can't, then that's the reason why we lost. That's one of them. That's one of why we lost, in part.
Now, as you can tell, Fetterman's still struggling a little bit. Sounds a lot better than he did just a couple of years ago.
That was my first reaction, is that, like, for a guy who had a stroke, it was how bad it was. I had a chance to run into him in a Fox News green room. He's getting better. It's not perfect. It's not smooth, but, you get the point across pretty clearly. And so glad to hear his recovery is continuing well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But he's also spitting hard facts at his party. Glad to hear it's not just him. And there's a growing number of Democrats getting close to that 60 number. So, Jim, hopefully common sense is going to win the day here, but we still got a little ways to go.
Yeah, the range of outcomes appears to be either the Laken Riley Act passes and I guess conceivably could get to President Biden's desk, or it could get to President Trump's desk, depending on how quickly they transmit it to the White House. And it looks like you're either going to have it passage or it's going to be really close, and probably an enormous amount of grief and aggravation will come on the Senate Democrats who vote against this. In fact, I kind of wonder also, will you have some who will vote for cloture, vote to bring it to the floor, and then oppose it because you don't want to be seen as one of the folks who prevented this from happening? You mentioned the change in the House vote. I have a piece, let's just say on the editor's desk at one of the places that I write, that was basically asking the question to readers: if you're in the country illegally and you get arrested for burglary, larceny, shoplifting, any of these things, what should happen to you? Because right now there's a very wide range of things that could happen. You could be held, you could get prosecuted, you could get released and told to show up for a court date that, let's face it, a lot of these people will not show up for that court date. Maybe they contact ICE, maybe they don't. Depends on whether you're a sanctuary city, sanctuary county. And remember, I think there's also several sanctuary states in which state police will not contact ICE. There used to be, ironically, back during the Obama days, up until after the 2014 midterms, there was a policy in place that automatically your fingerprints got sent to ICE, and ICE saw if you were on the deportation list or not. Obama suspended it, after the midterm elections in 2014. Not going to do that before. Of course, midterm elections went pretty bad for them anyway. Trump reinstated it in January 2017 by executive order. Biden comes into office, undoes it by executive order in 2017. And my suspicion is that Trump, if he'll probably take his hand off the Bible and then sign the reinstatement of that particular policy. But you look at this and you're like, if you're in the country illegally and we catch you trying to steal something, you should be out of here. Some of the House Democrats who voted against this said, well, there's a due process issue. You're only accused of a crime. You haven't been convicted of a crime. Except you're already in the country illegally. Illegal immigrant. It's right there in the name. I'm reminded of the famous statement of Sonny Bono when asked about his position on illegal immigration. He said, well, it's illegal, isn't it? And from how lax these laws have been enforced, you're fair to raise that question. Is it possible that someone will be falsely accused of thievery or stealing or burglary or shoplifting, and end up getting sent over to Department of Homeland Security and ICE and end up deported by that? Yeah, that's like what could happen. But you're still in the country illegally. Like, why? The other crimes are just the cherry on top. That's kind of the issue there. So I don't think there's a particularly strong argument against this. And Democrats in the Senate have a choice. Either they can sign what seems like a very common sense piece of legislation, which, by the way, supported by all these Democratic senators in states that Trump won: Michigan, Georgia, Arizona. These are all states in which they kind of recognize that the voters have spoken. You can, deport these people who have already, who are in the country illegally and caught or arrested under suspicion of committing these other crimes. Laken Riley's murderer had like 3 run-ins with the cops, at least. And you're sitting there thinking, if they'd contacted ICE in any one of those, he might have been deported before he committed that brutal murder. Crushed her skull with a rock, they believe. I mean, this is a no-brainer. And so hopefully we will start the year with this, piece of legislation that probably should have been passed a year ago, finally getting to the president's desk. Or Senate Democrats look really terrible, and I suspect they will probably pay an even further political price come the 2026 midterms, which I know everyone hates hearing those terms, these words already, but that's the next shot people will have at enforcing their will on the public elected officials.
Oh, I think that's right. And I think that's also perhaps why you're getting these positions from Ossoff and Gary Peters. I think they're both up in 26. Also, don't miss that point that Fetterman made early on in his comment there. Hundreds of thousands of people who have committed crimes are in this country illegally. That's a problem. That's a real big problem. Some of them are here. Some of them, a lot of them, of course, were convicted of crimes in whatever country they came from. We know Venezuela, for example, has dumped a lot of their criminals and shoved them to the north and hoping to get rid of them down there and putting them up here. So, there's a big problem to deal with here. And if you can't get the low-hanging fruit, I'm not sure what good you are. But hopefully we can get 2 more Democrats on this. All right, BetterHelp. We are now 8 days into 2025. That means you've had a full week to stick to those resolutions. How are you doing? What are you thinking about in terms of goals for 2025? Well, today, the 3 Martini Lunch is sponsored by BetterHelp. And when it comes to 2025, try to make it the best year possible. Deal with some of those issues that have potentially been holding you back, or figure out what it is that can help you reach your best potential. And so when it comes to dealing with things that have been nagging at you for a while, or figuring out the best ways forward, try BetterHelp.
BetterHelp, one word, is fully online. It makes therapy affordable and convenient, and it serves more than 5 million people worldwide. You can access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. And you can easily switch therapists anytime you like at no extra cost.
Write your story this year with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now, and just horrific images coming out of Southern California. There are multiple fires burning in and around Los Angeles. There's the big one is Pacific Palisades, the one where we're getting all these just apocalyptic seeming images from, with fire everywhere. If anyone's seen the video of the guy still in his house with the fire all around his glass windows, it's just absolutely chilling. There's one near Pasadena. There's another one further up the coast. And in addition to the fact that the winds are whipping and all sorts of other problems that are driving these fires to be much more aggressive than they were just a couple days ago, we're now getting more frustration about the limited response that can happen in this situation, basically due to politics and environmental policy here. First of all, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, is in Ghana for an inauguration in Ghana, which I'm sure she's hopefully trying to get home from early. I don't know, but you would definitely want to get back if it was your city, I would think. The person that she beat in the L.A. mayor's race a couple years ago is Rick Caruso, had been on the board at the Reagan Library. As Jim writes in the Morning Jolt today, he was a Democrat for about 20 minutes to get in the mayor's race. He was on the Fox affiliate in Los Angeles last night explaining why the L.A. firefighters really can't do much to stop these fires.
You don't see the firefighters there because there's nothing they can do. And it looks like we're in a third world country here. Mm-hmm. And we've got a lot of tough questions that we need to ask the mayor and the city council and our representatives and the county representatives. Why didn't you work to mitigate this? What was your brush mitigation program? I heard you earlier talking about it's been dry because there hasn't been rain. That's not the biggest problem here. The brush up in these hills that are controlled by the city and the county, I would bet you that if they haven't been handled, mitigated, pruned, removed for probably 30 or 40 years. This was a disaster waiting to happen. And what's predictable is preventable. And who's paying the price are all of these people in their homes and their businesses tonight.
This is a ridiculous situation, Jim. There's always a wildfire season. There's always a danger at this time and other times of the year. But it's much, much worse because of policies meant to supposedly help the environment. But in a lot of cases, they make things a whole lot worse.
Yeah, we should be clear that there is no government policy that can completely prevent wildfires. The environmental circumstances aligning in the Los Angeles County area are about as bad as they can possibly get. They've had a drought. That means you got a lot of vegetation and brush that is basically just dry kindling. The locals call it Santa Ana winds. I'm thinking of I Love L.A., the song Santa Ana winds blowing in from the north. They get really hot. They start out in the Great Basin out by Nevada. They come down through the mountains, and as it descends closer to sea level, the air temperature increases as it gets more compressed together. And it can be very strong. Apparently, they've had gusts of up to 100 miles an hour in the course of this fire, and it's expected to continue high winds for the next couple of days. So you start a spark. It ends up having embers. Because of the winds, the embers carry very far, and you're just in just a perfect storm for really out-of-control wildfires. Some of this stuff is beyond the ability of government policy to control. With that said, we're now also seeing consequences of policies that can either mitigate the effects of these fires or exacerbate the effects of these fires. I also would point out, and I wrote about this in today's Morning Jolt, some West Coasters are like, this is perfectly normal. If you grew up on the East Coast the way I did, it's a little strange to look at a topographical map of Los Angeles and see some extremely densely packed people in the valleys. Los Angeles County is actually the most highly populated county in the country. About 9.5 million people live there. It's about the size of Connecticut. So there's the city, and then there's the broader county outside of it. You'll have densely packed valleys, but then you'll have vast stretches of state parks, national parks, forests, just like the open land. And that's where these wildfires tend to start, which means that when it doesn't have to go very far before it gets into some very densely packed areas, and people end up losing their homes in large numbers. Tens of thousands of Los Angelinos have been evacuated. We can start with the mayor. Look, on the one hand, it's not that unusual for mayors to go on junkets or to go on, fact-finding missions or trade missions to other countries or something like that. Karen Bass has the worst timing since Ted Cruz went on vacation during that winter storm in Texas. I'm getting grief in both directions for making that comparison. I do point out that, look, when you're a representative of a state, you never want to be out of town when something really bad is happening to your state. That said, Ted Cruz is a legislator. There's only so much he can do in response to a severe winter storm. Karen Bass is the mayor. She was not around to make the emergency declaration for the city. It had to be done by the head of the city council because she was over in Ghana as part of Biden's 4-person American delegation to the inauguration of the president over there. And it just feels like, did she really need to go to this? Of course, she didn't foresee that this was going to be such a severe wildfire risk, but it just seems just about the worst possible timing. She's almost literally on the other side of the planet for a leader who most Los Angelinos have never heard of, in a place most Los Angelinos probably could not find on a map. It's just really, it makes her look bad. I believe she came back this morning, but not around for the first 24 to 48 hours of this crisis. Not great. Then you have how the state has administered its resources towards this. There are Los Angelinos. Mickey Kaus lives in Venice or Venice Beach, and he's been saying there are neighborhoods where there are no fire trucks around, and you see the flames coming. You see the smoke over your heads. Part of it is, and if you see people have seen the videos of these flames bigger than the houses, just coming down the hills with a great speed. There's only so much the fire trucks can do. What Caruso was talking about in that audio clip is that in the Palisades, they've lost water pressure. There's no water coming out of the hydrants. Very little of the fire hydrant. Fire departments can't do much without water. And so you have right before, as the winds were starting to pick up, Newsom is like, "Don't worry, the state is here. We've pre-deployed all of our assets in the best possible places." And a lot of Los Angelinos are asking, "Did ya?" Again, maybe this is a scale of a disaster where no state response was ever going to seem sufficient. But I think there will be very hard questions about whether the state was truly prepared in the way that it should. And then you mentioned the question of the reservoirs, and I would just add also the issue of controlled burns. Now, the U.S. Forest Service said in October, stop doing controlled burns in all of California. They may have had what seemed like a decent region at the time, is that they wanted their firefighting crews available in case there are fire outbreaks in other parts of the state or in other parts of the country. I get that. The problem is there's been a big fight about controlled burns basically all over the state of California. Sometimes the federal government doesn't do this enough. Sometimes the state doesn't do this enough. Sometimes the localities don't do this enough. I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers here. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference in this particular one. Having said that, fire management has been this serious issue going back decades in California. And there are quite a few folks who are in this business who say, look, the state doesn't do nearly enough controlled burns. This is one of the best ways to... With a controlled burn, you create an area that basically everything's dead, right? Everything's already burned. And you're probably, oh my goodness, well, that's terrible, But however, that means that when embers land down on there's no brush, there's no kindling, there's nothing to catch fire. So I'm not going to pretend that all of this is a result of, we shouldn't act like this is all a result of government policy. But government policies can make a difference, and there are going to be really serious questions asked about a bunch of them in the lead up to these particular wildfires.
Yeah, just absolutely horrific. And hopefully we'll see some progress in fighting. Pray that the winds die down, obviously. Pray that there's going to be some rain to stop this horror show. I mean, it really looks kind of like Maui in some of these things we're seeing on social media, and it's just horrific to see that again. So many lives just horribly impacted, and rebuilding in that environment is not going to be easy either. So, Jim, just as an aside, I remember there was a local scandal here in Northern Virginia about county leaders taking a taxpayer-funded junket to sign an agreement to make a sister city deal in Ghana. I think we need to shut down taxpayer-funded trips to Ghana until we can figure out what the heck's going on.
I concur. Establishing a sister city is one of the feel-good things that local officials do, and generally, it's as far as government waste goes, it's probably not the most egregious case, but it ranks up there. But it also is frustrating. Like, you can get away with it as long as you're not out of town when something really terrible happens. The problem is that when you are, you look like you're asleep at the switch and out having what's really a taxpayer-funded vacation on taxpayers' dime, and just utterly unresponsive to your people in its hour of need. And I don't begrudge. Rick Caruso came surprisingly close for a Democrat, wink, wink, who was clearly, pretty on the more conservative side, particularly on issues of crime, homelessness, things like that. And if I were him, you lost to somebody who you think you should have beat, and she's doing a terrible job in the city. Now, I think she's up in 2026, so we'll see if the Los Angelinos have a different opinion in about a year or 2 years from now.
Well, this is going to be a huge issue in that race, I would imagine. All right, let's talk about NetSuite by Oracle. Look, if your business is focused on its outlook for 2025, you don't know all the conditions you're going to face, inflation, interest rates, all sorts of other things. But there are certain things you can control, and that's the technology that you use to make your life easier and take care of the things that need to be done. And for more than 38,000 businesses, they've future-proofed their operations with NetSuite by Oracle, the leading cloud ERP platform. It integrates key business functions like accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one seamless system.
Closing your books in days instead of weeks means you spend less time on past reports and more time focusing on future growth. This efficiency lets you shift your attention from historical tasks to the strategic initiatives that will drive your business forward.
Talk to small business leaders frequently and experts on the subject. There are so many things you have to spend your attention on. Let NetSuite by Oracle do this work for you. It is critical to freeing you up to do what you do best. And speaking of other opportunities, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And I made a little allusion to a statement made by Trump in the 2016 campaign there about shutting things down until we know what's going on. But yesterday's press conference at Mar-a-Lago got a lot of people talking, and it certainly had the left lighting their hair on fire again. So take a deep breath. There's nothing he's going to do for the next 4 years that isn't going to drive the left nuts. And specifically yesterday, a couple of things. First of all, he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Made me think, who actually decides those things? I don't even know. But that's certainly fun. And then there was this issue as on the same day, he sent Don Jr. and others up to Greenland to make a pitch for Greenland becoming an American territory, as well as him wanting to restore American control over the Panama Canal. There was this question.
Your references to Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And then he elaborated a little bit on that decision.
I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security.
And so he went on a long tangent about how it's terrible for Jimmy Carter to give away the Panama Canal, which of course it is. And so, Jim, by the end of the day, you had Trump being called an imperialist and threatening for the rest of NATO to invoke Article 5 if we go into Denmark and all sorts of other things. He did rule out military options in annexing Canada. So, I mean, obviously what I think is happening here is Trump is kind of flexing his muscles. This is going to be a more assertive foreign policy than Joe Biden, maybe a little Monroe Doctrine aspect here. Kind of poking the bear and seeing what he can get. Maybe he can get a good deal, at least getting access for America to the rich natural resources in Greenland and Canada. And who knows what could happen at the Panama Canal. And so we're going to have John Fetterman's reaction in just a second. I think the Gulf of America thing is just fun. In terms of the other negotiations, I think it's just his unorthodox way of doing it. And we'll see what we can get out of it. I don't think we're going to be invading anywhere in these areas anytime soon.
So the question is, Mr. President-elect, are you going to militarily invade a foreign territory in which the U.S. already has a major U.S. Space Force base? We're there. We're already there. Although we should point out, Denmark did say they were deploying 2 more sled dog teams to prevent any. I believe one of them was named Yukon Cornelius. Hey, what did John Fetterman say?
Hey, John Fetterman was again on special report with Britt Hume. And he, again, is basically telling Democrats, chill out. First of all, a lot of good can come from this, depending on, how these potential negotiations go. Right now, Trump's kind of flexing the muscles. But more importantly for Democrats, you can't freak out every time Trump says something.
There's a lot of freakouts, and of course I would never support taking it by force. But I do think it's a responsible conversation if they were open to acquiring it and whether just buying it outright. I mean, if anyone think that's bonkers, it's like, well, remember the Louisiana purchase? Well, I think Alaska was a great deal too. $50 million, I think it was. It was referred to as Seward's Folly. And now that was Alaska now. So, I mean, open to having all kinds of conversations as well. And now I don't think it's not helpful to freak out. But some things might work out, some may not. But that's part of an ongoing dialogue. But he hasn't even taken office in 2 weeks. And, we really need to pace ourselves if we're going to freak out over every last tweet or every last conversation or press conference.
$7.2 million for Alaska. That's a pretty good deal. You can get several Alaskas for 1 year of an NFL quarterback now. So, Jim, Fetterman's right.
The purchase price of Alaska is really a backup linebacker these days.
Pace yourself, Democrats. Come on. This could actually be a really good thing.
So there are times where Trump's provocativeness, outlandishness, boisterousness, or whatever term you want to use there, there are times where it can work. And I think probably the best example I've seen lately, the Financial Times had reported this, and yesterday Trump more or less confirmed it, that he was willing to continue U.S. military aid to Ukraine. But in return, he wanted our NATO allies to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. Now, the current threshold is 2%. More of them make it, but not all. There's like 30-some members, and we're in like the low 20s. And it kind of had been leaked that Trump would settle for 3.5%. Now, if you ask for 5 and they come back and say we can live with 3.5, if you could get every member of NATO spending 3.5% of GDP, I would take that deal every day of the week and twice on Sundays. So if that's the upshot, if that's where we end up, then yes, demanding 5% has worked out really well. I don't think at this point there's going to be serious consequences of antagonizing Denmark over saying we really want this, or Panama and saying we want the canal, or with Mexico saying we're going to order the U.S. Coast Guard to not call it the Gulf of Mexico anymore. We're going to call it the Gulf of America. That said, I do wonder if there's a law of diminishing returns, that with each successive, oh my God, you can't believe what Trump just said sort of moment, do they devalue them? Does it become less shocking? Does it become less effective when every day Trump is saying something new that we all kind of know isn't really going to turn into policy, and that is just him kind of, shooting from the hip, so to speak? So, look, I suppose you could say better rhetorical shooting from the hip than actual physical shooting at anybody, or particularly, allies and things like that. But I do wonder, okay, this has been fun. When do we actually get focused on legislation? I'm hoping that after January 20th, there's so much going on in Capitol Hill and so many executive orders to be issued that we don't have time to start, But this way, in summarize, Greg, so far, Trump's second term is a lot more cartography-based than I expected.
Yes, exactly right. And by the way, no politician is going to go through a long laundry list of things they'll never consider doing.
Yes,
I mean, the idea that there's going to be a military strike is highly unlikely, bordering on never. But the idea that he's going to go out there and say, well, yeah, of course I would never do that. This is the guy who's, it's a different world in business, and maybe even some of the people he's talked to in his first term. His approach to negotiation is a little bit different than the Washington press corps is used to. And of course, they don't like Trump anyway, so they're going to light their hair on fire.
Greg, we also probably should point out that I'm sure somewhere on a shelf of the Pentagon, there is a military plan to militarily invade and occupy Greenland. That's because the shelves of the Pentagon are full of plans to invade and occupy every space, every spot on Earth, probably including Canada. So watch yourself, Justin. But we're not actually. This doesn't mean we're going to necessarily do any of these things. It's just the Pentagon is a bit like the Boy Scouts. They like to be prepared.
Jim, what are we, 12 days away? And by the way, if you're headed to the inaugural luncheon after the swearing-in ceremony, take your time. Trump's going to have a stack of executive orders to sign before he gets in there. That's going to make the omnibus bills look small.
Show up with carpal tunnel from signing so much. But sprain. Bring in the auto pen.
Anyway, Jim, have a good one. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday, and please join us on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.